Well, thanks, John, for remembering that. The theme today is creating a strong professional learning system. And then we have a nice quote here from Michael Fullen and Steve Munby back from 2016. I think it holds. Our strong belief is that all schools 100% should be involved in focused, productive networks within which leaders, teachers, and students challenge, support, learn, and innovate with one another in ways that measurably improve outcomes. So it's here on your screen if you want to take a look at it. It's not a great image, but it is the model of leadership that Fullen talks about. And you can see the little piece taken out about cultivating collaborative cultures. And one of the focus areas today for our speakers is going to be on professional learning and supporting that collaboration via their new standards. So question I have as people are coming in the room, if anyone wants to take, as Cipriano called it, a healthy risk and share how you are supporting collaboration in your professional learning systems. So this is just getting the conversation going. If people are comfortable sharing or sharing something that you want to do in that area, that would be really helpful so we can start getting our minds ready to think about these standards.
Hi, I'm Becky, and I'm from Minnesota. And one of the things that I found most important as I was currently a building administrator, and it was providing time. So actually structuring time within the day for people to meet to collaborate.
Very good. And that's something that we see a lot right now, that there's not that time anymore, right? There's no subs there, I don't need to give you the list, the COVID list, but it's becoming harder and harder. Thank you, Becky, so much for sharing, and welcome too. This is her first director's webinar.
Yes, thank you.
Other thoughts on how you are supporting collaboration, or how you would like to support collaboration with your professional development?
Jennifer, go ahead. I was just going to fill the airwaves and give people a chance to think. So go ahead.
Thanks, John. This is Mary Chappell from New Mexico, and I think the biggest thing was being open to changing the design of the program based on the collaborative efforts, and to not kind of get stuck in, well, this is the way the state wants to do it, but to really be open and to listen and to adopt a truly collaborative spirit.
That's wonderful. Great. And learn, you focused on that word learn there, and also I heard some innovate as well. Great. And did you notice, Mary, this kind of has a nice connection with street data?
Very much so, yes.
Yeah.
Jennifer, I was just going to call out that Amy Gelmer Erickson said in the chat, noticing common challenges across projects and creating opportunities for discussions and connections.
Excellent. So it sounds like, Amy, you're thinking about it from the SPDIG state management team, thinking about how they collaborate. Am I right in assuming that?
Yes, and from evaluation is in the chat.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you for the evaluator's perspective. And I think I didn't share with the Learning Forward team that most of our SPDIG projects have external evaluators, and they are wonderful partners in this work. And they come to our webinars and give us great thoughts, great feedback, and drive our work. All right, so if folks would please introduce yourselves in the chat, add, your name's going to come up, so we just need your state, your role with the SPDIG, and if you could type a little something about what you best think enables collaboration between educators. We heard so far time, using what comes out of that collaboration from Mary. So if you didn't get a chance to share your thoughts, if you would add that information when you add your state, your role, and then what do you think best enables collaboration between educators? And John, if you would type that in the chat, that would be great, just to make sure everyone has that available. All right, news and notes. I'm going to do this the quick way. Contact Kelsey if you're interested in using shorthand. Shorthand is a fantastic program that we have the license for all of you to use. You can use it for newsletters. You can use it to put different information into one place for your website. You can use it for so many things. Maybe if you're having a stakeholder meeting, you can be sharing results in a shorthand. So please connect with Kelsey if you're interested, and she will get you started. We're hard at work. The program area meeting planning committee is hard at work with myself and the SIG network folks, planning for you. Was it July 21st, July 22nd during the project directors conference. Just want to let you know that we are on it. We have the director's webinar on building readiness with Cipriano Lucario was last month, and we have that available to you if you were not available to join. The SPDIG national meeting will be virtual. I know a lot of people have been waiting for the call on that. That said, it does not have to be October since we're having it virtually. Usually October is that month where there's not snow, kids are in school, et cetera, but we could really move it around. So if you all have thoughts about the best month for that meeting, do let us know. What did you think of our May SIG Network newsletter? So real briefly, I am going to show you, let's see, not that, let's see, I think it's here. Or maybe I won't, it might take me too long and I want us to hear the Learning Forward folks. So I will go back to this. But anyways, please do take a look at the newsletter. I think it's got some great information. It's got some potential grant opportunities. It's got Iowa's data that they put together about their implementation and their outcomes. They put all of it into a single infographic. So it's a good example. Thank you all for putting together all your data and information and APRs and getting them into G5 on time. We appreciate all your hard work. And we're glad that period is over because I know it causes some stress for people. And then if you are a project director and have not responded to the grantee satisfaction survey and you cannot find it in your inbox, then please do contact Eric Schweitzer. His email is there, and request another link. I can't provide the link personally, but we can get it figured out. So if you have trouble reaching him, just let me know and we will work on that together. All right, so as you are hearing the Learning Forward team describe the new professional learning standards today, please be thinking about our evidence-based professional development rubric. So the domains of selection, training, coaching, data systems, and facilitative administration of systems intervention, and be thinking about what are we missing that might be important that you're hearing in these new standards. What might we modify a little bit? Is there anything we need to change, or are we good to go? That's also a possibility. At the end of today's session, we are going to ask you for your 3, 2, 1 in the chat. And that means you're going to be providing 3 big ideas you took away from hearing our presenters, 2 questions you still have, or considerations you still have that you feel weren't fully met. You want to dig into them a little bit more. And then 1 action you'll be able to take walking away from our time together today. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn it over to our Learning Forward team. I think most of you, if not all, know Learning Forward. They are our professional learning association. They are the leaders in the field in this area. They do great work, and it's been really exciting. I know a lot of you have been waiting for the new standards. They're out, and I was so grateful that Elizabeth and Paul and Michelle were willing and able to come join us today and talk about the research those standards are based on. They're going to pull out the collaboration piece for us and get into that a little bit more. Talk about innovation configuration. Some of us love those, so we're excited to hear that. So I think there's going to be plenty of information for your 3, 2, 1. Please, everyone, do be prepared to use your camera in a few minutes when we do breakouts so that you can use your mic and camera and be part of the conversation. So with that, I will turn it over to the Learning Forward team to introduce themselves.
Thank you so much. Well, why don't I start? I'm Elizabeth Foster. I'm the Vice President of Research and Standards at Learning Forward. I've been with Learning Forward for about 5 years, and for the past 2 years, I've been working on updating the research foundation for standards for professional learning and the revision of the standards themselves, as well as contributing to the work we've done to release the implementation resources. So in past iterations of the standards, they were released sort of by themselves. And then a year or 2 years later, the implementation tools were released. And for this version, we have released selected implementation tools at the same time. So we're excited about that and excited to share a little bit about the standards update with you today and get into some breakout conversations about what resonates and what you'd like to learn more about and what some of your next steps might be. So I will turn it to my colleague, Paul Fleming, to introduce himself.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. Great to be with all of you this afternoon too. As Elizabeth mentioned, we are on the standards team at Learning Forward, and I'm Senior Vice President for Standards in States and Equity, and work with a lot of state departments of education districts around the country to develop really cohesive and comprehensive professional learning plans that are going to incorporate a lot of the pieces you'll hear today, especially with our revised standards and some of the new pieces around equity, around culture of collaborative inquiry, around professional expertise, and how important that is, as we know, at the state level, especially, and at the district level, so that all educators have access and opportunity, right, for high quality professional learning and inclusion models and many different pieces that I think are really, really important. I'm also glad that Allison from Tennessee is here, because I was at the Tennessee Department of Education as Assistant Commissioner for doing Learning Forward about 2.5 years ago, and also a former high school principal in Nashville, where I'm based. And speaking of Nashville and Tennessee, I'll turn to my colleague, Michelle, at this point for her to introduce herself. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. And I'm going to try to do the history, heroes, heartbreaks, and hopes. So hopefully I do this right, Jennifer.
Well, there's no wrong for sure, but we do I promised I'd do a model, and most of the people on here took part in this big national meeting, but just a little reminder. So, the 4 H's as a way for people to introduce themselves: the history, heroes, heartbreak, and hope. So my history is I was a special education teacher in the state of California, and I was also a social worker for people with disabilities there. And I also was Peace Corps volunteer. And my heartbreak when I was a teacher is seeing so many things, but seeing so many dusty textbooks that weren't being used, that were so expensive, in closets, and being part of really, great training and no coaching, no follow-up. So that was a heartbreak of mine. A hero of mine is Jeffrey Canada, who started the Harlem Children's Zone, or led the Harlem Children's Zone, which we based Promise Neighborhoods after. He's fantastic if you've never heard him speak. And so my hope is that all of us working together are going to get to a place where there's not an educator in the United States who doesn't have the tools they need to give kids everything they need. I'll turn over to Michelle.
Thank you, Jennifer. And before that, Paul, I forgot to thank you for your nod here. So my history is classroom. Actually, I started, my very first job in education was as a parapro. I worked with a student who had a fine motor skill disability, and I worked one-on-one with him to take notes. And at that time in a middle school classroom, although I had no plans for education, I fell in love with it and went back and did what I needed to do to ensure that I could become an educator. So from there, I taught in the classroom, English language arts, 7th and 8th grade level, became an instructional coach at the district level, and found my way, fortunately, with Paul's help, into professional learning at the state level. And here I am with Learning Forward today as Vice President of Standards Implementation and Outreach. So similar to Elizabeth, I focus really on the tools that help districts, organizations, and individuals implement those standards. My heroes are, actually, my hero is my grandmother. She was a teacher. She was a teacher when it was in segregated rural Kentucky, and the standard that she set for her students, and hearing those stories for her really just set the bar in terms of educational excellence. My heartbreak has really disengaged students. My niece just graduated from college. She has a number of learning disabilities, and just the way that she has struggled, the way that she struggled, I think in many cases it was unnecessary struggle. And so, you know, she's one among many, unfortunately. And so that's a heartbreak to have to watch that happen. But my hope is that we will, you know, learn ways and be aware of and use different strategies to really support all students to be successful regardless of their various abilities. Thank you.
We're so glad you all are here. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to start off. First, I kind of want to circle back and follow the model of history, heroes, heartbreaks, and hopes, because it really leads into this conversation today with you all about the standards. I started out as what they called an inclusion practitioner working in middle schools in Boston. And it was really what led to some heartbreak that then led to where I am now, because I was very enthusiastic, committed to the kids I worked with, but frustrated that I did not have any kind of ongoing support in figuring out how to best support the kids I was working with who had a range of disabilities, and helping general education teachers understand what those students needed in the classroom and what they needed for supports. And I was one of those really enthusiastic young teachers who was told, you'll be fine, you'll figure it out, you'll be fine. And I wasn't fine, and no one else was fine, and the kids certainly were not fine. So I then transitioned to doing qualitative research about teachers and teaching. And that kind of led me ultimately to working at Learning Forward, where we are completely focused on providing ongoing supports for educators. And, you know, the standards are our anchor and our foundation and sort of the main driver for all of the work we do. So thank you for letting me circle back on that. And I'm going to give you an overview of the standards and what's new in this revision. And then Paul and Michelle are going to dig into some of the implementation tools. So I'm going to share my screen. And my first question for all of you, if you could put this in the chat, is how familiar are you all with the standards for professional learning? So as we're getting started, it would just be helpful for us to know how familiar you are with the standards.
Elizabeth, are you asking about the 2011 or the 2000?
No, I'm asking about, since they just came out, I thought that might be a little unfair. So I'm asking about familiar in general with the standards.
Okay. Got it. So we got a not very familiar. Familiar, but don't quiz me. Tom, we're going to quiz you. I'm sorry.
Yes,
Fairly,
that's good.
somewhat, not somewhat strong, but just started to explore the new standards. So you've got the whole scale.
We've got the whole range
Yeah,
here.
whole range.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my screen okay, or am I?
No, but yeah, it's so far nothing is being shared.
So far, nothing is being shared. Okay.
If worst comes to worst, I have your slides, just so you know, I can share them.
Can you can't see that?
Mm-mm. Oh, now it's coming. Yep, there it is.
Oh, okay. It's sort of just like a series of buttons you hit until it happens the way you want to happen. So thank you. So yeah, it's interesting to see. And I see that comment about California having its own set of standards. I know there are states like Rhode Island that have very closely aligned standards for professional learning that aren't necessarily the Learning Forward standards, but are closely aligned. So thank you, that's helpful. Well, as I said, we're excited to share with you a little bit about the new standards that were just released April 25th. We had a whole launch week where we culminated our 2-year process of revising the standards in a release week. And this was, as I said, a process that we tried to make as collaborative and inquiry driven as possible. So we gathered data from our members, our affiliates, our organizational partners. We had an advisory council made up of teachers associations, active practitioners, state policymakers, international colleagues focused on professional learning, and tried to really represent every role in the system and gather feedback and input from those experts as we revised the standards. We also did, as I mentioned in my introduction, a significant amount of research and updated the research foundation for the standards. We partnered with the American Institutes of Research to conduct a literature review that looked at all the concepts in the 2011 standards, looked at emerging areas of interest that people had offered as suggestions for including in the new set of standards. And then AIR actually did a meta-analysis about the constructs in the 2022 standards. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So because we are going to do a pretty quick overview, there are 11 complex new standards and a lot of associated resources. So because we're going to go pretty quickly today, I'm going to point you first to 2 resources that you can explore later, or we can talk about in the question and answer period. For the first time ever, we have a really comprehensive website about the standards that include each standard, obviously, and all the detail about each standard, but then also some supportive resources like a short brief about why and how states can adopt the standards for professional learning. We also have action guides for several roles in the education system, including state policymakers, district leaders, principals, instructional coaches, and classroom teachers. And Paul is going to talk a little bit more about the one that's most relevant to our conversation today. There's also information about the research base, about the AIR study, and then an overview of all the different studies and the various inputs that the standards team and the advisory council looked at as we were updating the standards. And then the other resource I'd like to offer you here is that during the kickoff week, we had a webinar every afternoon at 3 o'clock focused on a different sort of perspective about the standards. There's an overview webinar. There's a sort of a step-by-step in-depth look at the standards. There's a policy-focused webinar. There's a webinar about how all of the system, all of the different roles in the system come together to collaborate to work with the standards for professional learning. And then there's an hour on the research base on the Friday that of the launch week. And I point this out just to say that depending on your perspective, there's a recorded webinar that might offer you some detail about just a different look at the standards. And those are all on our Learning Forward website. So a quick history, Learning Forward first developed these standards in 1994. And I know that some of you are familiar with these, so I'll go pretty quickly here. And this is our 4th version of the standards. It is probably, I would argue, the most comprehensive. Maybe I'm biased to say that, but it includes some specifics about curriculum and equity and professional expertise that past versions have not. We've also, as you'll hear about in a second, returned to framing all of the standards in terms of content, process, and context, which we did not have in the last version, but heard from power users of the standards that was a helpful organizational structure. So we've returned to that structure in this, this version of the standards. This is a just an overview and a quick look at the 11 standards. And again, you can see that they are organized into 3 frames. We have an equity standard in each frame, and we can talk a little bit about that. We are also showing not only a list here of standards, but the graphic that represents the standards, what we're calling the wheel or the pie. And we're excited about this graphic because it shows the integrated nature of the standards as a whole. You see each standard sort of represented within the frame, within its particular frame, but the way the standards come together at the center in this graphic is something that that was very important to us. We don't want people to see or enter into the standards in a linear way. And we know that sometimes people start at the top of the list and go down. And what we'd like people to understand with this graphic is that there's really no beginning and no end. You enter, if you enter into the equity driver standard, you're sort of brought into the whole cycle and the whole circle. And we know that cyclical, recursive improvement is what's critical in professional learning. And we like the way this graphic represents that. I talked a little bit about the frames. I won't dwell on that, but here you can see how each frame represents sort of a different aspect of professional learning. And the frames also help us understand that you can't attend to one aspect of professional learning and leave others out. You can't only focus on the content. You can't only focus on the process. And we like the way the frames kind of help remind us that we need to take a balanced and comprehensive approach to standards implementation. I won't dwell on this too much, but these are the foundations or the operating principles that permeate the standards and kind of just have informed the revision and sort of act as the cohesive web that holds all the standards together. The 2 that I think are probably relevant for our conversation today are policy guides practice. We know that this has actually been one that we have talked a lot about as a team and that has gotten a fair amount of discussion among our reviewers, because we know that policy guides practice, but practice informs policy. And again, it sort of points to the fact that there needs to be a cycle here in which policy is guiding practice and learning from practice at the same time. The other one that I think is probably relevant here is around the systems foundation, that it's really professional learning systems that act collectively and collaboratively, that drive high quality professional learning, drive improvement of educator capacity and therefore student outcomes. So I'll just leave these up. And as you can see, and we'll talk about it in a second, equity is an important consideration throughout throughout the standards. This is our theory of action or theory of change. We're not quite sure what exactly to call this, but we call it the graphic that shows how standards lead to improvement for all learners. And really what you see here is professional learning, the professional learning system grounded in standards grounded in the standards leads to growth in educator knowledge, skills, and belief. And then in turn, growth in educator practice. And then again, in turn, an improvement in outcomes for each student. And I see in this graphic, and we intentionally designed this graphic to show movement and to imply that there is, again, this cycle of, learning from data about improvement for students informs the professional learning system, further informs growth in knowledge and practice. So this is one that we spent an inordinate amount of time developing, I will say, because it's complicated and it's kind of hard to show a cycle without getting trapped in a circle. And at one point we had stick figures in this whole thing. So we're happy with the way this represents how standards drive improvement on a lot of different levels. I mentioned our efforts to update the research foundations for the standards. Again, I will just say that the standards are grounded in both updated research. We know there's been a lot of research over the past 10 years since the last set of standards about the power of leadership, about what we know about how collaborative inquiry works, what we know about equity, not only in terms of large scale studies and meta-analyses, but in terms of specific interventions and what they tell us about sort of implementation of the standards. And as I said, we worked closely with AIR, who conducted a literature review and a meta-analysis. And all of this is on the website that I described. I will just say that we were pleased that the meta-analysis found consistent evidence that alignment with the standards is associated with teacher instruction and student achievement outcomes. And I know that all of you know that when you go into a meta-analysis process like this, you don't know what the findings will be, and you hope for a finding like this. So we, we were pleased that this was what AIR found. I think I'm taking up a lot of time, but I'll just say that here's some more detail about the findings. And again, the meta-analysis is on the website. One of the interesting things in this work with AIR and with our advisors was that we were able to also surface some areas in professional learning that are in need of additional research. We know there's not enough research about equity in professional learning and professional learning as it relates to social emotional learning. We also found that there was not enough in the literature about the conditions that support good choices in professional learning systems. So Learning Forward is eager to sort of delve into some additional research about these areas. So for those of you that have already seen the standards, you're probably familiar with this structure, but I'll just review it quickly. Each standard has a common stem. Professional learning leads to equitable and excellent outcomes for all students when. Then each standard has its own statement that summarizes the content of that standard and highlights the three constructs that make up each standard. So you can see here that these bolded subheads are the three constructs for each standard. Each standard has has three with an accompanying narrative. There's also links to other standards. And this is a really important box in each one of the standards because it's selected ways that that standard speaks to or aligns with other standards in the set. And it's not a complete list, but it's some of the highlights of how, for instance, collaborative inquiry links to equity drivers. And then at the end of each standard, there's a list of selected resources. So while we have a full bibliography of resources on our website, in the standards, there's a select few that are a combination of research studies and articles or policy briefs, so that wherever you are coming to the standard from, you can find a next good read from the standard. It was important to us. So while equity has always been a critical part of the standards throughout the history of Learning Forward's standard development, equity has not been as explicit as it is in this revision. So as I mentioned, each frame contains an equity focused standard. Equity foundations is in the condition, I started the wrong way. Equity practices is what we think of as classroom level equity, equity related professional learning. So this is about how practices change in the classroom and need to be supported in the classroom to ensure that all students have access to academic content and opportunities to learn. Equity drivers we think of as focused on the educators themselves, examining their own backgrounds, beliefs, potential biases that they might bring as they approach instruction, as they approach their classroom. And this is really about supporting educators to examine themselves and their potential misconceptions that are impacting instruction. And then Equity Foundations is focused on the conditions that support this kind of examination, this kind of shift in practices in a lot of cases. And this is where we talk about, as someone mentioned, some of the need to reallocate resources, reallocate time, think about your staff and faculty arrangements. So this is really all about sort of the conditions that then lead to the drivers that then lead to improved equity practices. A new standard in this revision is focused on curriculum assessment and instruction. And this standard reflects the research that has emerged over the past 10 years about the power of curriculum-based professional learning. In the past, the standards have not specifically addressed curriculum and assessment in such a specific way. But for this, we felt that the research had really emerged over the past 10 years and presented compelling evidence enough to add a standard focused on just this area. Then the sort of counterpart to that one is focused on professional expertise. And this is a standard that speaks to educators. You know, we at Learning Forward know and believe that all educators have a responsibility to continually develop their own practice, seek out new learning, understand the standards they work with and work among in some cases. And so this is really about educators understanding their own responsibilities and seeking out learning that aligns to their roles. This again is pointing you to the resources. As Michelle mentioned, we sought to make sure that educators in different roles had implementation supports as the standards were released. So we have action guides, quick start guides, policy tools, and innovation configuration maps that we'll talk about in some detail in a little bit. And this, I think I'm going to turn it over to Paul in a minute, but I just want to point out that what you'll see in these action guides and in the innovation configuration maps is that we thought a lot about how educators need to collaborate, not only the way people sometimes think about collaboration, like in a school-based team or a professional learning community, but we really tried to emphasize and support collaboration across roles and the importance of alignment across roles and actions. So these action guides and the IC maps all connect and speak to each other and align not only across the standards, but across all these different roles, so that we're not only talking about and advocating for collaboration and coherence and alignment, we're supporting it in the implementation tools. So with that, I will turn it over to Paul to talk more specifically about the action guides.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. And as you note and you see here, I think what we're really after, and I think all standards have to answer this essential question, right, regardless of content, and that is, who owns the responsibility, right, for continuous growth and improvement for each educator and student? And I think the answer is we all do, and every role does. And that's why these 7 action guides are important as we look at everything from the classroom teacher, as you see, to the principal level, the coach level, the superintendent level, the district, the system and central office leader, often responsible for, chief academic officer, and then also the state policymaker with state commissioners and their teams, and finally external partners. So all 7 of these have a common framework, right? And that's quickly to say this, that each action guide is trying to show 3 things. One, again, showing the standards and the standard statements. Second, what are the key responsibilities for each role? Because again, I think there's this ownership piece that we see standards, everyone is aware of standards, but how do we drive deep implementation of the standards for professional learning, which is the intent of this action guide. So each one of these action guides has a list of key responsibilities aligned to each of the 3 frames that you heard from Elizabeth, spelled out in bullet form so that it's quick to read and to think about. And then the third piece of each one of these action guides is a list of guiding questions, because at the end of the day, we want this to be the actions that you and your teams are taking at the state level, at the district level, at the agency level, and it's not the learning forward actions that are being perceived as coming from us. And so those guiding questions are really important to develop first steps, right, to think about. So what you'll see in, say, just to wrap up, for example, is you'll see as a key action in the state guide is something under rigorous content, is to advocate for inclusive learning practices, right, for each learner in any learning environment. And so that is a key responsibility for the state level. And then there's corresponding, as we mentioned, the guiding questions to get people to think about, okay, where do we need to start and what are our first steps that we're actually completing as a team, rather than, again, coming down from learning forward, telling the state what to do, which I think is another important feature. So that's quickly, those are free. Those are on the standards website for all 7 of those action guides. And it's important for you, if you have a chance to try those out. They go very nicely to, as I'll turn it over here to, I believe, Michelle, for now thinking about and talking about just an overview of the IC maps, the innovation configuration maps, that give a more detailed blueprint for what does it mean to actually move and improve practice aligned to each one of these standards. So thanks, and I think I'm turning to Michelle.
Thank you, Paul and Elizabeth. If you don't mind, could we navigate to the website where we, or do you want to start with the slides for the innovation configuration maps?
Let me start with the slides. First, let me just pause and see if anyone has any questions so far or thoughts. I can see some great comments in the chat, but we're happy to pause. We've kind of shared a lot of information with you in the past 20 minutes. So.
I actually did have, this is Jennifer, one question, I think, comment. I haven't really worked it out yet. So we did have a presentation. It was not this whole group. It was one of our breakout groups. I believe it was either coaching or multi-tiered system support. Not entirely important for it, but we had a presentation from Jim Short and oh gosh, blonde hair, short,
Stephanie Hirsch.
Stephanie, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And they talked about the high quality materials, but it's been a few years at this point in time. That was when that report had first come out. And so not everyone would have been there. So could you speak a little bit more to why high quality materials are important and what that entails, what it takes to be that material, and why you think that connects with success in improving student outcomes?
Sure, Stephanie is the former executive director of Learning Forward, as you may know. And just before she retired from Learning Forward, she and many of us on the staff spent a fair amount of time looking at the research about high quality curriculum and instructional materials and the impact that not having high quality materials has on educators and students. So yeah, we can talk about this and that process with Stephanie and then our subsequent kind of conversations with Stephanie and Jim and definitely informed the addition of the curriculum assessment and instruction standard. And we think of this as a really important equity issue because we know that where high quality curriculum and instructional materials are in place, educators have clearer guidance about the content they need to teach, what's on grade level, what's not on grade level, how to design and utilize meaningful assessments. And without that kind of structure, we know that things can get off track. Adaptations can be made that lower expectations, that take students off their path to achieving grade level content standards. So it's an important factor. I would say that, you know, there are those who believe that high quality in curriculum and instructional materials alone can address the issue. And Learning Forward, you know, we know from the research and the work we do in some of our networks and contracts that it's really the combination of good professional learning and high quality curriculum and materials that help support educators to build their own capacity and meet their students' needs. So Paul, I can see that you might want to add here too.
Oh yeah, I was just going to add, and I think it's important, as we all know, like in Tennessee and in many states, right, teachers are spending, because we've surveyed them, you know, 8 to 12 hours a week looking for high quality instructional materials. And the challenge is, it's not to blame them, but if they're pulling from Pinterest and Google and Teacher Pay Teacher, those are sites where the quality is not uniform and it's not there to really give access and opportunity to all students to be in above grade level. So I think that's why there's the key equity piece here. And I think, as Elizabeth mentioned, what's kind of haunting is that opportunity myth study, right? And, you know, 90% of students are meeting all the expectations of assignments, but it's only 10% are at grade level in ELA. Right. And that was only a couple of years ago that came out. So I think that's another key factor of, like, every student needing to make sure they have access and opportunity is a key driver here. So.
And there's a good question from Allison from Tennessee. And I wanted to real quick, so in the special education world, We're thinking about evidence-based practices. We're thinking about high leverage practices.
Yeah.
And then we're thinking about, you're talking about the high quality instructional materials, right? And so I
Right.
think where they converge and how everything works together is maybe something we're still working out. And then universal
Yeah.
design for learning, how we support, so I think there's a lot we're still figuring out, but Allison said, absolutely agree, HQIMs are essential. I'm curious how you're working to ensure that there are HQIMs available for all students, including
Yeah.
those with the most significant cognitive disabilities for whom there are barriers to access with the standard materials.
Yeah, and I would just quickly add, I think this is a
Mhm.
key lever for state agency folks, right? To really know and understand what are the guardrails and what are the policies that help get to Allison what you're saying, so that it's not funding driving the planning and selection, but it's the planning and selection of these materials, using the funding. But often we know that, especially at the state agency level, sometimes the funding drives that or lack of funding, as opposed to really being clear on, what are the components that every external vendor and every, company that's in the textbook and HQIM market really needs to understand and know that the state sets forth. And that is a state power that's often underutilized, I think, as I would argue, especially around those with cognitive disabilities and the materials available. That states are hesitant or just don't see it as an opportunity to kind of set in stone both the components and the policies that would really help that process along, which is a big lift, but if it's not being done, then you get the Wild West approach and everything under the sun, right?
I do appreciate, Elizabeth, what you were saying about, it takes both arms, the professional learning as well as the good materials, because teachers don't have time to create all their own materials. And there's the possibility of getting them from sites that aren't as trustworthy.
Right.
But there's also, once they have the materials, they need to know how to differentiate for all the different students. And you can't do that without the professional learning. The materials can support that to a point, but you still,
Yeah,
and I think that's where it's helpful to have your own child in a classroom to see how these things play out.
Well, and I think part of our role is to raise awareness about the importance of this issue with our partners and colleagues and members and districts we work with who might see these things as completely separate, and that siloed way of looking at this issue contributes to the problem, because not everyone recognizes what high quality means, how they can figure out what is high quality, how to advocate for a different kind of selection when that's appropriate, or what they can do from their role to advocate for high quality materials. So I think part of what we're trying to do, and part of the rationale for adding this standard to the standards for professional learning, is to raise awareness about the power of the combination.
Great. Thank you for answering that.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question we talk about with Jim and Stephanie all the time, actually. So thanks for raising it. Okay, so now I am going to, Michelle, do you want me to start with a slide, or just want to dig right into the IC map that's on the website?
Yeah, let's jump right into the website, Elizabeth.
Okay, that sounds great.
Mhm.
Oh, I had it up and then I moved it. Hold on one sec. Do you want to do a little just overview while I pull it up? Thanks.
Sure. Actually, I would love to hear from those here that are with us. We gauged your level of familiarity with the standards, but I would love to do a similar activity. If you could just put in the chat from 1 to 5, your level of familiarity with the IC maps or innovation configuration maps. If you wouldn't mind, just quick 1 to 5, 1 being not familiar, not very familiar, and 5 being highly familiar. Okay. Great. Well, as you can imagine, with the revision of the standards, the 2022 standards, we also needed to revise the tools. And so we are very excited that that the IC maps have just accompanied the release of the 2022 standards. For those of you who are less familiar, I will share that the innovation configuration maps really are a highly functional tool. They are designed to be a tool to help educators really identify what the standards look like in practice. So in my daily role, what does it mean to have the standards guide my work or even influence my work? So the innovation configuration maps really seek to help answer that question. Elizabeth, could you scroll up just a bit there? Yes. Yes, thank you. So I'll start just at a very high level, do a flyover of the innovation configuration map. So this is a tool that is organized by role. We put out 4 roles initially, and those are maps for a person who's at the system level, the central office, who's thinking about or in charge of professional learning of any type. We put out a map for a school level principal, for a coach at any level. The coach maps are designed to function for coaches both at the school level and also at the system level. And then we design maps for external providers. And to the right, you can see there that there is a map for every standard. So for the central office role, if I pull up the map, then I have my role for all 11 standards, and that is true for the additional 3 roles. We'll focus today on our equity drivers, the map that accompanies the equity drivers standard. And so Elizabeth has clicked there, and what you get are, you heard the structure of the standards containing 3, what we call constructs, or 3 major components. And so the IC maps follow that same structure. So when you pull them up, and right now they're strictly web-based, but when you pull them up, you see the headings that correspond with each of the constructs in the standard. So for equity drivers, we have prioritize equity in professional learning practices, identify and address, educators identify and address their own biases and beliefs, and then educators collaborate with diverse colleagues. So those represent each of the constructs within the equity drivers standard. And so then clicking on any of these 3 constructs, we're going to get a drop down. And since we're, collaboration is so important to the work that you all do, we will just dig into that one. So collaborate with diverse colleagues in the equity drivers standard. And so within each IC map, the constructs are highlighted by desired outcomes. So the goal here is that if I am reaching the desired outcomes, then I am really hopefully achieving the idea of the construct here. And so within each desired outcome, there are 4 levels. Those of you who are familiar with the previous version of the standards, you may remember that there were up to 6 different levels. We kind of pared that down, trying to reduce or eliminate redundancies and also just streamline. So the IC maps moves across. It's a little bit counterintuitive because the first level, level 1 to our left here, is actually the highest level that we refer to as ideal. So if the standard is being implemented kind of at the highest level, then these are the actions that you will see that you that we propose that you see in the daily work. Okay, so we can see here, for example, at the highest level for collaborating with diverse colleagues, the system leader is modeling with every professional learning design, respect for individuals' identities, such as gender, culture, race, and other aspects of identity. Okay, so if I am a system leader and I'm not quite at that level yet, I may look down and say, okay, this is where I'd like to be. However, where might be a more realistic starting point? So I may then go over to check out level 2, level 3, or even level 4. And I can say, okay, I have already recommended modeling respect to my, to my staff. So I'm going to really focus on, I'm going to move up a level and focus on level 3. And I'm going to begin to model that respect. Okay, so that's going to be my entry point for this particular desired outcome, which is building my own and my client's capacity to engage diverse colleagues in conversations. Elizabeth, and let's just go and check out, if we can scroll down and check out some of the other behaviors for this desired outcome. Thank you. We'll focus on, just for ease of finding where we are here, locating ourselves here on the map, the bottom row is supporting clients to adjust in collaboration with stakeholders representing diverse perspectives. So I'm supporting their practices to strengthen engagement of diverse stakeholders in a safe and productive collaboration. So we know that we don't want to be the only ones at the table. We want to hear from parents and community members who want to hear from advocates. And so at the highest level of implementation for this particular behavior, this outcome, then I am, as an external partner, then I am supporting that collaboration and finding ways to really implement practices to strengthen the engagement of these stakeholders. So let me pause there and see what questions you have, if any. Okay, so I see that Tracy's asking, do you have to have member access, to be a member to access this? You do, except for the example that we are showing, equity drivers. The system level equity drivers is a public document. So we want folks to be able to access enough of the IC maps to understand what they are and to see the value there. But they do, to access all the others, a membership is required. Okay, and Becky says the IC maps will be helpful in setting professional goals with educators. Yes, that's exactly right, Becky. And I mentioned that the IC maps are multifunctional by design. Other ways that they can be used are to plan professional learning, to assess professional learning, to guide implementation, to help monitor progress, and even to evaluate in some cases. So depending on your role or the time of year, the IC maps can be used for a variety of purposes.
Can I just add one thing that
Please.
is, we've been talking a lot about collaboration and collaborative practice today, and the IC maps can also be used to ground team conversations about professional learning and expectations, and sort of, we talk about the importance of shared language in collaboration and collaborative work. And this really, I hate to say it, but like literally gets people on the same page when talking about where they are with respect to achieving the outcomes in the standards.
And thank you, Elizabeth. I want to add to that and then acknowledge Amy's question. So in the revision of the IC maps, there are four elements or components, elements, I guess, of implementation that we really wanted to focus on. And collaboration is one of those. So throughout many of the maps, you'll see that moving from that level 4, kind of what we refer to as the entry level, to the ideal, that so the core action remains the same, but in order to reach ideal for many of them, the level or degree of collaboration is increasing from level 4 to level 1. Some other really key components that we highlight are equity. So increasing the diversity of voice strengthens from the entry level to the ideal, as well as sustainability and then impact or reach. And so what that looks like regarding collaboration is at a level 4, I might be doing the thing for myself. So I may be engaging in my own research, for example, whereas as I move across the map, I may move from doing it for myself, the research, to involving other system level leaders, to involving system and school leaders, to involving system school leaders, and let's say, leadership teams at school levels. And with the equity, it's very similar. So it may go from doing something at the district level strictly, all the way over to involving parents and other community members and advocates, as I mentioned, at the highest level of implementation. So those themes are really, we understand from research how important those components are to high quality professional learning. And so those are not only reflected in the standards themselves, but also translate into the innovation configuration maps. Okay. And so I think what we'd like to do here, Elizabeth, what do you think about a 10-minute breakout group to kind of discuss?
Yeah, I think that would be great. I mean, we'd love to hear from people about what resonates, what you would like to learn more about, and how you might utilize the standards and some of the resources, including the IC maps we've talked about, in your own work. So I think a 10-minute breakout session would be great. Is that okay with you, Jennifer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And John has kindly put together the breakout rooms, and you can see the Padlet link for the session. So before everyone goes into breakout, if you can go into the chat and then choose the Padlet, open up the Padlet link, and then you'll have access to that for notes as you're in your work group. So Elizabeth and Michelle, what would you like them to focus on and add to the Padlet?
Thanks.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
We'd love to hear how you might use the IC maps in your work and what resonates in not only the IC maps, but in what you've heard today and in the standards. So if you can't envision yourself using the IC maps, we'd love to hear what else might resonate with you or be relevant to your work.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Excellent. So yeah, each person can take their own notes. In this case, there's not a specific note taker. And then when we come back together from the breakouts, please do be prepared to talk about, I have a few people share about what you heard and what stuck with you.
Great. Then I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms, and people can join that, and we'll call everyone back in about 10 minutes.
Good to see you all. Elizabeth, do you want me to share my screen to show the Padlet as people talk, or do you want just to have?
Yeah, that would be great. That would be wonderful. We can see all the faces.
That. Very good. So while I'm working on that, I'm just gonna close everything out. If someone could share something that stood out from their conversation with their group.
our group, we talked a little bit about like learning design at the state level and having to take a step back. We've done a lot of professional learning to districts on how they serve their teachers and their students, but we are kind of in the process of stepping back and having to look at what is our design to serve our districts and the teachers. And so using those innovation configuration maps to look at where we are now and see where we can go as a state agency and state team and our service delivery and our learning design model.
I love the special guest star that just appeared on the screen. That's so lovely.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Grandpa is here. She just wanted me.
Don't be sorry. This is like the highlight of Zoom.
I was fortunate to have Kristen in my group, and it was awesome. And she was multitasking, and that's like the most important work you can do. So, and I appreciate, Kristen, you sharing that, because I think that's so true, right? Is how do you coordinate? And I think one advantage of this set of standards is how to provide common language around effective evidence-based practices that can go forward, especially when every division is engaged in professional learning and every office is, every funding stream is separate. So it's like one way to really try to connect the dots, which is, I think, exciting. So.
I'll just say that one of the things I don't know if you could see when we showed the ICMAP website is that there's a link on the side that pops up all of the outcomes for all of the different roles. So you can, I think that's helpful in planning, because you can sort of see how they map to each other and where you might start and then enter the world of ICMAPs.
Jennifer, do you mind if I ask a question?
Sorry, I was on mute. Please do.
I think, the one question I'm wondering about, and I'm from California, so we have, the California QPLS, but I don't know exactly what the vision is for how these get used. And I think I'm wondering, practically speaking, other than people reading them and becoming familiar and rating themselves, like, where is the time that people are using these and under what circumstances and how often? Does that make sense? My partners, for example, in Arkansas, were saying that in their state, they used to have external PD providers would rate their training according to the QPLS standards. So that was one application of them, but I'm wondering about that.
It's a great question. And I'd love for my colleagues to jump in on this, but the answer really is it varies across contexts. So there are some states that adopt the standards. There are some and then it guides it structures their guidance for districts, which means it structures then their contracts with external providers. In some places it is alignment to the standards is a requirement for funding for professional learning. In some cases, it becomes part of the principal and educator evaluation systems. We know of some states that have used alignment to the standards to structure incentive grants from the state to help transform professional learning plans and offerings at the school level. So there's a whole range of ways that the standards are used. And we know that districts often come together around the standards as they create their professional learning plan or as they add professional learning to their strategic plan. So then it guides school choices and resources. And Paul and Michelle, you could add here too.
Yeah, I would just quickly add to Elizabeth, I think that's a great range of, you gave like the continuum of levers that are there. I think we're seeing more and more now districts saying, we have a current professional learning policy passed by our school board. Let's make sure now we revise it and it's aligned to the standards so that it lives in policy, even in states that have not formally adopted the standard for professional learning. you have districts that are taking on their own, which I think is really powerful to say that we again are going to have a professional learning policy grounded in the standards for professional learning. And I think that's another somewhat newer wave that we're seeing that I think is great to kind of complement formal state adoption. Right, that's there.
Mhm.
If those are helpful examples.
Thank you.
And so just recognizing that we have 5 minutes left, right? Oh, quickly, if you don't mind, I'd like to circle back to Amy's question, which we have not yet addressed. And let me pull up the chat to get that question before I turn it back over to
I can read
Elizabeth.
it to you, Michelle. It says,
Oh,
do you provide examples for how these could be measured? And it was
Okay.
back when we were talking about innovation configuration maps.
Fantastic. So that was in regard to the maps. Again, I invite my team to jump in, but the one element of especially with these being online, is that the maps themselves are the measure. And so again, if I recognize that maybe I'm starting at the level 3, which may say something like collecting qualitative data 3 times per school year. And then I'm looking across so that the level 2 is more frequent. And then the level 1, the ideal would be, regularly or consistently, or, to whatever interval reaches that ideal. We simply, just track that in and of itself along the way in the map. So the map really is designed to be the measure. And so we're hoping that is the way that you find that useful and that is functional in that way. Does that help? I feel like it's somewhat of a circular response.
Amy, you're still on, so you can absolutely add whatever you want. But one of the things I was thinking is, they have annual performance reports, these grantees, all the grantees do, that they create performance measures for. And so I think you could create a performance measure around certain sections of the innovation configuration, around the whole, across all. I think you could look a lot of different ways that you could create a performance measure.
Right.
But we use a rubric similar to that idea of the rating system. So
I'll also just mention Amy was in my breakout group, and we talked a little bit about this, and I know she's in a car, I think, traveling with lots of people, but we also have an inventory called the Standards Assessment Inventory that is a teacher self-report instrument aligned to the constructs in the standards. So for instance, for the equity practices one, there are questions related to how well you as an educator understand your students' backgrounds, or how well, or if and how well you have a relationship or do outreach to families. So that inventory is also available, and I know people use it as a pre-post measure frequently. So
yeah. And there was another question from Kristen. For the IC maps, would you recommend SEAs and local control states work as the system personnel or an external provider? I can't see the differences in those yet without a membership, so I'm not sure how they're functionally different.
That's a fantastic question.
that is a great question.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it depends, knowing how different state departments function and seeing that difference. I honestly think it depends on how your department functions. So for a department that is more hands-on and kind of more direct service. I would say that the system central office map might be a great starting point. Of course, you'd have to modify it, customize the actions based on your work. But for those who are a little more hands-off and more leave that more up to the district and kind of are more policy oriented, that the external provider may be a better starting point. Thank you for that question. I'm going to think about that more.
Yeah.
Great.
So we
Thank
are
you for the
right.
clarification.
Thanks, Kristen.
I
And
would like to arrange for the baby to come to all of the meetings. Yes.
it seems to be a
So
calming,
happy.
calming presence, baby.
Yeah.
I did want to mention one thing about your question too, Kristen, is our grantees are in this interesting place that they are not the district. So lots of the change, like the high quality instructional materials question is an interesting one because they're not making that choice typically for the district. That it's going to be an odd situation where they actually get to tell them the curricula that they want them to use.
Mhm.
And so I think there's a question about how you influence these things while being that external group.
Yeah, the advocacy piece. Yeah.
All right, I think we are at time, but I want to thank Elizabeth, Michelle, Paul. This was fantastic. I hope that we have more opportunities to dig into things. And of course, if you all have things that you want to get feedback on from our group, we would like to help you as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. And we really appreciate all the great
Thank you.
questions and thoughtful comments. It really helps us as we're thinking about what's next for the standard. So thank you very much.
Yeah, this is a terrific group. I'm sure you all can tell. So
They are.
we're lucky to be able to work with them.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, John, for organizing us. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you as well.